faith forward, and then keep marching. So it's our honor to have you all here tonight to celebrate Shabbat and celebrate the legacy of Dr. King. And we're going to kick it off with Carl Selkin of our Social Justice Committee, who's going to tell you what's going to happen next.
What happens next is I hobble up to the microphone and say, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And please feel free to move up closer. We're a wonderfully friendly congregation, and the closer we are physically, the closer we'll be spiritually. So anyway, I'd like to welcome everyone and to introduce Anne-Marie Odie and Howard Landau, who are co-chairs with me of the Social Justice Committee. And before we start, I'd like to thank Assemblyman Chris Holden, who is here, Reverend Larry Campbell, and let's see who else, Terry Tornick, our former mayor and much esteemed congregant. I think Rick Cole was going to be around someplace, and Anthony Portantino will be here in a little while. So we have a wonderful group of interesting, important, and progressive politicians here tonight. So as we honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, we remind ourselves how much work there is left to do to repair the world. A bit later this evening, Peter Dreyer will accept the Rabbi Marvin Gross Social Justice Award. But to begin this evening, please welcome Cynthia Kennedy. We asked her to speak to us as a preview of the Dr. Martin Luther King study group, which is gathering Monday, which is the Martin Luther King Day, at 11 a.m. at the California African American Museum in Exposition Park. Please visit CAM to listen to and discuss the entirety of Dr. King's passionate, brave, and inspiring 1967 speech. After services tonight, join us for the Oneg reception and informal discussions. By the way, thanks to Elliot Mazer and his family, we will be using glass plates and actual silverware for noshing at PJTC. We're getting rid of plastic, okay? Except for credit cards, which are always welcome. Some words of gratitude to Cynthia. Recognizing the fierce urgency of now, she leads Pasadena 100, a coalition of 24 area organizations to bring about the rapid transition in Pasadena to 100% carbon-free electrical power by 2030. Growing support makes us optimistic, more optimistic than we've ever been, actually, that this goal will be adopted in the next few weeks by Pasadena City Council. Cynthia chairs the Climate Committee of the Pasadena NAACP, as well as the Environment Committee of the Pasadena Area League of Women Voters. She is the talented, connected, dedicated linchpin that has made success possible. I'm pleased to introduce Cynthia Kennedy, who will help us listen with refreshed minds to Dr. Martin Luther King's 1967 speech at Riverside Church in New York. Cynthia.
Thank you, Carl. I wish to thank Rabbi Carrier and the Social Justice Committee of the Pasadena Jewish Temple for inviting me here tonight. What an honor to be able to join you in this celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy. For the past 10 years, I've helped organize the King Study Group which sounds like it's very formal and organized, but it really is just a group of people who come together every year for King Day at the California African American Museum. And sometimes we meet in between. And what we do is very simple. Our format is that someone introduces a particular speech or sermon of Dr. King, and we change it every year. It's something different. And we try to avoid the really famous ones like I Have a Dream. We're trying to find some of the more unusual ones to listen to. So we do a little introduction and then everyone listens. And we really try to follow the injunction of both the Old and the New Testament to hear with our ears, to really hear his words. We don't do much else. We just listen, really. So this evening, we will follow that format. I'm only going to speak for maybe 5 more minutes. And then we will listen to a 15-minute excerpt from a sermon that was delivered by Dr. King on April 4th, 1967. That was exactly 1 year to the day before his assassination. The title of the speech is variously referred to as the Beyond Vietnam speech, or the Time to Break the Silence speech, or sometimes simply the Riverside Church speech. How many of you have ever heard it? I'm just curious. Raise your hand if you've heard it. Okay, so many of you know it. It was delivered at the beautiful neo-Gothic church, the Riverside Church, in New York City, in Morningside Heights, near Columbia University in Harlem. There were about 3,000 people there. And Dr. King was invited by an ecumenical group. It was Dr. Commager, the Amherst College professor, Henry Commager, who's an historian, the Union Theological Seminary president, John Bennett, and Rabbi Abraham Heschel. And these luminaries had been involved in a group called Clergy and Laymen Concerned About Vietnam. This sermon is certainly the most controversial sermon that Dr. King ever delivered. And he delivered many. At the time, right after it was delivered, he was criticized by the Black community, by the NAACP. He was criticized by Dr. Ralph Bunche, the Black diplomat who was at the UN and was widely respected. The journalistic establishment criticized him. The Washington Post, the New York Times criticized him. And there's a famous, I don't know if you've ever seen it, a famous editorial page headline right under the banner of the New York Times. So the whole editorial board had endorsed this. And it's entitled, Dr. King's Error. So what was this error? What was the error he made? His error was that he dared to speak out on topics other than civil rights. He dared address topics other than what was called back in those days, and I quote, the Negro problem, close quote. He dared to link what he called the triplet evils of racism, militarism, and materialism. Now, I remember this vividly, actually. I remember the debate because I was 16 at that time. And my childish mind, I was concerned with my Sweet 16 party and whether the boy that I liked was going to ask me to go study. And, you know, I had all sorts of concerns in my life, but I remember my mother was very upset. My mother was of the pro-Dr. King school in our family. And she was outraged that there would be this criticism. And then there was my Aunt Clara, who said, why couldn't he just be happy? You know, wasn't it enough? Wasn't it enough to advance the cause of the colored people? That's the way she would express it. And she didn't think he was bad, but she just didn't understand why it wasn't sufficient. So I remember this debate. I guess in today's parlance, this would be, why couldn't Dr. King stay in his lane? Many, many years later, I heard a recording of this sermon. And as a mature adult, I was captivated, not by his oratory, though his oratory is amazing. This speech, actually, the part that you're going to hear, it's not that hot. He's still warming up. My pastor, actually, Dr. Larry Campbell, was telling me the other day about how when you do a sermon, you have sort of you start slow and then you build up and then you strike fire and then you calm down. Well, this is still in the starting slow phase. So you're not going to hear a lot of fire right now. But it wasn't just by this oratory that I was struck. It wasn't also by his scholarship, although Dr. King, as those of you who've listened to him, he was an erudite scholar. And it's just astonishing the way he's able to bring historical references and explain things. But what struck me was his message. What I gathered from this speech, and the thing that touched me most deeply, was his definition of what a mature spiritual person should be entitled to talk about. In this sermon, you're going to listen for some of his words. He uses the term, the field of my moral vision. He talks about seeing, and he uses the word beyond, probably 7 or 8 times. You're supposed to see beyond national allegiance, beyond the calling of race or nation or creed. And I love this one, beyond the prophesying of smooth patriotism. In the last years of Dr. King's life, he had a broad field of moral vision. He decried war and imperialism. And in those days, you didn't use the word imperialism very much if you were kind of in the mainstream. He addressed racism in the North. He worked with labor organizations. Only a few months after this speech, he had begun working with sanitation workers in Memphis, which was, of course, where he was assassinated. As spiritual, mature beings, he taught that our vision must not be circumscribed. We see racism, we see violence, we see war, materialism. And following Dr. King, we see them all together in one large field of moral vision. That's what touches me about this speech. So I ask you, if Dr. King were alive today, would his field of moral vision have included the self-destructive materialism that has led the human race to use fossil fuels for money, to the point of destroying the ability of future generations to live on our earthly home? Would he have followed the conformist thought that we need to stay in our lane? If we don't know about energy, we shouldn't talk about it. A scientist wrote me an email today, a famous scientist I was trying to enlist for Pasadena 100. And she said she just didn't know enough about it and she didn't feel comfortable. So I'm trying to think of what am I going to say to her in response. I think that Dr. King, just as he saw the children of Vietnam suffering under our bombardment, I think Dr. King would speak out for the children of today and tomorrow and the day after that. I think he would be protesting. I think he would be speaking out. I believe that his field of moral vision would take it all in. And so now please imagine yourself in the grandeur of the Riverside Church in Morningside Heights. The lights are coming through the stained glass windows, and you are there with 3,000 people of all colors and all religions. And Dr. King comes up to the pulpit.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I need not pause to say how very delighted I am to be here tonight, and how very delighted I am to see you expressing your concern about the issues that will be discussed tonight. I also want to say that I consider it a great honor to share this program with Dr. Bennett, Dr. Comminger, and Rabbi Heschel, some of the distinguished leaders and personalities of our nation. I come to this magnificent house of worship tonight because my conscience leaves me no other choice. I join you in this meeting because I'm in deepest agreement with the aims and work of the organization which has brought us together, clergy and laymen concerned about Vietnam. A time comes when silence is betrayal. That time has come for us in relation to Vietnam. The truth of these words is beyond doubt, but the mission to which they call us is a most difficult one. Even when pressed by the demands of inner truth, men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in time of war. Nor does the human spirit move without great difficulty against all the apathy of conformist thought within one's own bosom and in the surrounding world. Moreover, when the issues at hand seem as perplexing as they often do, in the case of this dreadful conflict, we are always on the verge of being mesmerized by uncertainty. But we must move on. And some of us who have already begun to break the silence of the night have found that the calling to speak is often a vocation of agony. But we must speak. We must speak with all the humility that is appropriate to our limited vision. But we must speak. And we must rejoice as well, for surely this is the first time in our nation's history that a significant number of its religious leaders have chosen to move beyond the prophesying of smooth patriotism to the high grounds of a firm dissent based upon the mandates of conscience and the reading of history. Perhaps a new spirit is rising among us. If it is, let us trace its movements and pray that our own inner being may be sensitive to its guidance. For we are deeply in need of a new way beyond the darkness that seems so close around us. Over the past 2 years, as I have moved to break the betrayal of my own silences and to speak from the burnings of my own heart, as I have called for radical departures from the destruction of Vietnam, many persons have questioned me about the wisdom of my path. At the heart of their concerns, this query has often loomed large and loud. Why are you speaking about the war, Dr. King? Why are you joining the voices of dissent? Peace and civil rights don't mix, they say. Aren't you hurting the cause of your people, they ask. And when I hear them, though I often understand the source of their concern, I'm nevertheless greatly saddened. For such questions mean that the inquirers have not really known me, my commitment, or my calling. Indeed, their questions suggest that they do not know the world in which they live. I come to this platform tonight to make a passionate plea to my beloved nation. This speech is not addressed to Hanoi or to the National Liberation Front, but rather to my fellow Americans. That is, at the outset, a very obvious and almost facile connection between the war in Vietnam and the struggle I and others have been waging in America. A few years ago, there was a shining moment in that struggle. It seemed as if there was a real promise of hope for the poor, both black and white, through the poverty program. There were experiments, hopes, new beginnings. Then came the buildup in Vietnam, and I watched this program broken and eviscerated as if it was some idle political plaything of a society gone mad on war. And I knew that America would never invest the necessary funds or energies in rehabilitation of its poor so long as adventures like Vietnam continue to draw men and skills and money like some demonic destructive suction tube. So I was increasingly compelled to see the war as an enemy of the poor and to attack it as such. Perhaps a more tragic recognition of reality took place when it became clear to me that the war was doing far more than devastating the hopes of the poor at home. It was sending their sons and their brothers and their husbands to fight and to die in extraordinarily high proportions relative to the rest of the population. We were taking the black young men who had been crippled by our society and sending them 8,000 miles away to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia, which they had not found in Southwest Georgia and East Holland. So we have been repeatedly faced with the cruel irony of watching Negro and white boys on TV screens as they kill and die together for a nation that has been unable to seat them together in the same schools. So we watched them in brutal solidarity, burning the huts of a poor village, but we realized that they would hardly live on the same block in Chicago. I could not be silent in the face of such cruel manipulation of the poor. As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. I have tried to offer them my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they ask, and rightly so, what about Vietnam? They ask if our own nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problems, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, for the sake of the hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent. For those who ask the question, aren't you a civil rights leader? And thereby mean to exclude me from the movement for peace, I have this further answer. In 1957, when a group of us formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, we chose as our motto to save the soul of America. We were convinced that we could not limit our vision to certain rights for black people, but instead affirmed the conviction that America would never be free or saved from itself until the descendants of its slaves were loosed completely from the shackles they still wear. In a way, we were agreeing with Langston Hughes, that black Bart of Harlem, who had written earlier, "Oh yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath, America will be." Now it should be incandescently clear that no one who has any concern for the integrity and life of America today can ignore the present war. If America's soul becomes totally poisoned, part of the autopsy must read Vietnam. It can never be saved so long as it destroys the deepest hopes of men the world over. So it is that those of us who are yet determined that America will be are led down the path of protest and dissent, working for the health of our land. As if the weight of such a commitment to the life and health of America were not enough, another burden of responsibility was placed upon me in 1954. And I cannot forget that the Nobel Peace Prize was also a commission to work harder than I had ever worked before for the brotherhood of man. This is a calling that takes me beyond national allegiances. But even if it were not present, I would yet have to live with the meaning of my commitment to the ministry of Jesus Christ. To me, the relationship of this ministry to the making of peace is so obvious that I sometimes marvel at those who ask me why I am speaking against the war. Could it be that they do not know that the good news was meant for all men, for communists and capitalists, for their children and ours, for black and for white, for revolutionary and conservative? Have they forgotten that my ministry is in obedience to the one who loved his enemies so fully that he died for them? What then can I say to the Viet Cong, or to Castro, or to Mao as a faithful minister of this one? Can I threaten them with death, or must I not share with them my life? Finally, as I try to explain for you and for myself the road that leads from Montgomery to this place, I would have offered all that was most valid if I simply said that I must be true to my conviction, that I share with all men the calling to be a son of the living God. Beyond the calling of race, a nation, a creed, is this vocation of sonship and brotherhood. Because I believe that the Father is deeply concerned, especially for his suffering and helpless and outcast children, I come tonight to speak for them. This I believe to be the privilege and the burden of all of us who deem ourselves bound by allegiances and loyalties, which are broader and deeper than nationalism, and which go beyond our nation's self-defined goals and positions. We are called to speak for the weak, for the voiceless, for the victims of our nation, and for those it calls enemy. For no document from human hands can make these humans any less our brothers.
I want to thank Sean Paper for his generosity and skill in editing that together and making it possible for us to do this here. I want to thank our guests for speaking so sternly beforehand. I wasn't here, but I was in my office making sure our live streaming was working. So because everybody should get to see that. We're now going to begin our traditional Friday night service in a traditional way, and then perhaps we may do something untraditional. So I hope you'll bear with us. The first thing we like to do on Friday nights first is say Shabbat Shalom. All the times before this was just practice. Shabbat Shalom. So how we like to begin this service is with increasing the light in our spaces, in our homes, and in our hearts. And these lights are represented by these candles that were lit ahead of time, but they have not had the blessing said near them. So I want to invite the co-chair of the SJC, Anne Marie Odie, to say the blessing over the candles.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Amen. Shabbat Shalom.
And now for the traditional, untraditional part, I just want to say a few words of introduction. For those of you who come often or come occasionally, this part of the service that we're entering into, which is called Kabbalat Shabbat, it's called Welcoming the Sabbath. The idea is that some of the mystics of our tradition, the people who were of strong feeling and creative aptitudes, about 500 years ago said, we can't just pray our regular prayers. I just came off a really hard week. How do we take this, Sheshet Yamim Tavod, the 6 days of work, and immediately ascend to the peace of Shabbat? We need a little help. And so they composed some original music and brought in some traditional poems of our poet King David in the form of the Psalms. And they constructed something that helped them to get into the feeling of Shabbat before getting into the regular prayers. In that spirit, to help us get into the feeling of Shabbat in a way that I hope will include everybody in this room, we're doing something we haven't done a whole lot before. You may notice that we've encouraged you to sit closely together because this is going to go the best if we do. For those who have been here many times, you won't hear all the songs you normally hear, maybe one song we normally hear, but we're going to hear it in a totally new way. One of the instructions of David is Shir l'Adonai Shir Chadash. Sing to God a new song. And even if you're singing an old song, because that's what the comfort you need, sing it in a new way. And so for those of you who haven't been to this kind of service before, you're learning with the rest of us. However, I highly encourage you to sing with us. And Cantor, our wonderful teacher, is going to help us all do that.
Shabbat Shalom. We're going to take these moments of Kabbalat Shabbat with only one prayer. We will focus on Lecha Dodi. And for right now, even though you know it is page 21 and 22, I'm going to ask you not to look at it. I want you to just be here for a moment. And I want you to repeat after me. Na, na.
Na, na,
Try that again. Na, na.
na, na.
Now let's do those two nanas together. Na, 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 na. Good. Doable. Second part. Na, 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 na. Let's try that again. Na, 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 na. One more time. Na, 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 na. One last time. Na, 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 na. Let's take it from the beginning. Na, 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 na. One more time. Na, 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 na. Now we're going to do it again a little louder. 1. Get ready. 2, breathe. 3. Na, 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 na. One more time. Na, 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 na. Good. Can you hear your neighbor? Good. I can hear you. The last section of this, Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala Pnei Shabbat Nekabla, you will get a chance to look at your words in a moment. Here we go. Na 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 na. I'm gonna do it again. Na 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 na. One more time. Na 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 na. And the last fourth one. Na 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 na. We close it. Na na na. How many of you are familiar with this melody? Have heard it before? Good, good. So you can help. Good. The second part of it. Na 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 na. Try that again. Na 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 na. And then close it. Na 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 na. Let's try it from the beginning together. Lean on your neighbor if you don't remember how it goes. Na 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 again. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Try that again from the beginning. La da ya da ya la 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 ya la 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 ya da da ya da 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 ya da da. Page 21.
Can I say something?
You can say
I
anything.
love songs where everybody knows the words.
Right now you're saying we're going to start with a melody. Page 21. Lecha dodi likrat kala. Those are the words of our pismon, our refrain. We will go back to it after every stanza. Feel free.
And if those words are challenging, you use the other words that you know as well, just as long as you make sound. And the last thing I'll say is, if music affects you in a different way, more rhythmically, we've provided these wonderful percussion instruments if you feel like tapping on them. They're called your pews, if you like.
Just remember that it's an exercise. Shabbat is an exercise into getting into our own souls. No one is going to be grading you. You don't need to worry if you do it wrong, because you're not going to be doing it wrong. You're just going to be doing it differently. So let's join together.
And if you are self-conscious about your singing, do what I do. Close your eyes. Nobody can tell it's you.
Lecha dodi. Let's welcome Shabbat. Lecha dodi, lecha dodi likrat kala, penei Shabbat lekabela, lecha dodi likrat kala, penei Shabbat nekabela. Pick it up. שמור וזכור בדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל המיוחד, אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשם ולתפארת ולתחילה. Together, really loud. לך דודי, לך דודי לקראת העולם, פני שבת נקבלם, לך דודי לקראת העולם, פני שבת נקבלם. לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה, כי מקור הברכה מראש מקדם נסו סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה. Together, let's join in. I want to hear you. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. מקדש מלך עיר מלוכה, קומי צאי מתוך ההפכה, רב לשבת במקבחה, והוא יחמול עלייך חמלה. One more stanza. התנערי מעפר קומי, לבשי בגדי תפארת תחמי, על יד בן ישי ביתה לחמי, קורבה אל נפשי גאלה. Let's join together. לך דודי דודי, לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. התעוררי, התעוררי, כי באורך קומי אורי, 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 שיר דברי, כבוד אדוני עלייך. Next page 22. לא תבושי ולא תיכלמי, מה תשתוכחי ומה תמי, בך יחסו עניי אבי, ונבנית העיר על תלה. Together. לך דודי, לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. והיו לי משיסה שוסייך, ורחקו כל מבלייך, יאסיס עלייך אלייך, כמסוס חתן על כלה. ימין ושמאל, ימין ושמאל תפרוצי, ואת אדוני תריצי, על יד איש בן פרצי, ונשמחה ונגילה. Together. לך דודי, לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה.
We face the entrance to welcome Shabbat.
בואי ושלום עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצולה, תוך אמוני ים סגולה. בואי חלה, בואי חלה. לך דודי, לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. Forget about the words. יאירה, יאירה, one more time, and la super softly. ya la 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 la, ya la la. Ya la 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 la, ya la la. Ya la 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 la, ya la la. Ya la 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 la, ya ra do. Hi. How are you?
I don't know about you, but that moment of silence in the middle, I don't know if anybody else that gave a little, well, we have a Jewish word for it, shpilkus. It's like ants in your pants, like this. But then it reminded me of this teaching I heard from a musician. He was a jazz musician. And he said, sometimes the most beautiful notes are the rests. And I've never heard a better teaching about Shabbat in my life. So thank you, Cantor Ruth, for bringing that to us. It's beautiful. And thank you all for sharing your voices in this place. It sounded fantastic. So it's now my honor to initiate the beginning of the Rabbi Marv Gross Awards. Are we starting with Anne-Marie?
Shabbat Shalom to all. This is a joyous occasion, even if bittersweet, an annual tribute to a very, very important person, a leader, a friend to all of us, and an activist who made a huge difference in Pasadena and beyond, Rabbi Marv Gross. Tonight, we honor his close friend, Peter Dreyer.
Hi, everyone. My name is Becky Gross, and I'm Marv Gross's daughter, and I'm honored to be here today to present the Social Justice Award on his behalf. When I was 11, my dad took me to work with him at Union Station. I had no idea what I was in for, but the promise of having lunch with him at Vince's Deli sold me. As soon as we got to the adult center, he took me to the kitchen and introduced me to the head chef, Helen. She quickly gave me an apron and a pair of gloves and put me to work. I spent the morning making chili with her and the other volunteers. When we were done making lunch, I got to serve each client as they passed by the counter. My gloves were too big for my hands and kept slipping off, but I didn't care because I was so excited to be there. Helen stood next to me, and as each client passed by, she told them that I was Marv's daughter. They all lit up with joy. As promised, we had lunch afterwards, and he would tell me stories about the clients, how long he'd known them, their favorite hobbies, and what he was doing to help them, the importance of kindness and treating people with dignity. That was the first time I volunteered at Union Station, but certainly not the last. I continued to volunteer during the summers. I didn't understand what my dad was teaching me at the time or the profound impact this would have on my life. After I graduated college, I gravitated towards jobs geared towards social justice causes. When I started working in the affordable housing sector, I would call my dad during my commute home and we'd commiserate about the issues at hand. Difficulties navigating the bureaucratic systems, how creating change can be slow and frustrating, and how tiring it is to be an advocate for social justice. There were many days when I was ready to throw in the trowel and try something else. My dad would simply say something like, "Yes, it's hard, but remember your wins. Keep focused and stay the course. Eventually, it'll all be worth it. Think about the people you're helping." He would also throw in some Jewish proverbs, like, "If I'm only for myself, what am I? And whoever saves a single life, it is as if he or she has saved all of humanity." He would remind me that each human life is precious and valuable, and I was not required to take on the entire burden, but making a small impact was still worthy. He taught me to take a stand for what I believe in, unlock my heart for the benefit of serving others, and aspire to create a caring community because our faith and welfare is interwoven with those around us. This was his guiding light. My dad strongly believed in the values of inclusiveness, service to others, and kindness. Judaism motivated him to devote his life to service. He believed in Rabbi Hillel's quote, "Do not separate yourself from the community," because as my dad would say, other people are important and you have a responsibility to them. He dedicated his life to working for social justice and alleviating human suffering. He advocated for change in the community, specifically with the Social Justice Committee, where he helped organize rallies, protest marches for immigrant rights, create police accountability, promote tenant rights, and strive for racial justice. Giving to his community was